Hi children, I am going to continue the lesson now. First let us have a quick recap of what we learned in the first part of the lesson. The lesson is about impact of colonialism in India, how the forests were used before British rule and how they were used during the British rule, and how they exploited the forest wealth and how they deprived the tribal people living in and around the forest from their rights over the forest, and setting up of a forest department by the British government. And we also learnt about some of the Adivasi revolts like Santhal revolt led by Birsa Munda, and Kumaon revolt, Allur Sita Ram Raju revolt, and also Komaram Bhim's revolt. We learned about all these things in the first part. Now let us continue. Now to start with, the British government's industrial policies. What were the policies followed by the British government in respect of industries? In India, the first textile mill was set up in 1853 in Bombay, and then the next mill was set up in Ahmedabad. This already we know that the first textile mill was set up in 1853 in Bombay, and then the next one was set up in Ahmedabad. That means now in India also cloth was made by machines, and some educated people and factory owners, they demanded that a special tax must be levied on cloth which is imported from Britain, because still we were importing cloth, because the British people, they used to take away the raw materials and manufacture cloth in their factories, and then again they used to export it to India and sell it in the Indian markets. And because this was cheaper in the markets, all the people used to buy this machine made cloth only. And now since our Indian cloth was also made by using machines, the factory owners and the educated people, they demanded that a special tax must be levied on cloth imported from Britain, so that the cloth made locally can get a protected market. What is this protected market? Protected market means protection of local goods against the foreign goods by levying a tax on imports. If a tax is levied on imports, the amount of the tax will be added to the cost of the products, and then it will be sold in the market. That means the cost of the products will increase. The products will become costlier in the market. And if tax is imposed on imports, the cloth imported from Britain will be costlier in the market, and then the people will prefer buying local made cloth which is cheaper, and also it is also now made on machines by using the machines. That means local made cloth will have a protected market in India. Special tax levied on British cloth will make it costly, and thereby it will encourage the sale of cloth produced in Indian factories. And in Britain, the British government levied a special tax on cloth imported from India. Now see here, when they imported cloth from India, they imposed a special tax on cloth which was imported from India. To help the cloth industry of Britain to protect their local market, they levied tax on Indian cloth which was imported in Britain. That means if tax is levied on Indian cloth imported in Britain, it will be costlier in Britain markets, and cloth made in Britain will be cheaper. So all will buy it, and the Britain industries will be benefited. But the British government refused to levy a similar tax on British cloth imported in India, when our industrialists and the factory owners, they demanded that a special tax should be levied on the cloth which is imported from Britain in India. It was not accepted by the British government. The British government refused to levy a similar tax on British cloth imported in India. The cloth which was imported from India in Britain, on that cloth they levied a tax, but they refused to levy a tax on British cloth which was imported in India. When it was demanded by the industrialists and the factory owners also, the British government refused to levy a similar tax on British cloth imported in India. And unexpectedly, in 1896, the income of the British government drastically reduced in India. For some reasons, the income of the British government drastically reduced. And it was at that time that the British government levied a 3.5% tax on British cloth imported in India. Only to increase their income, they levied a tax of 3.5% on British cloth which was imported in India. But see, at the same time, the same 3.5% tax was levied on cloth made in Indian industries also. They levied tax on British cloth which was imported in India, and at the same time, the same tax, 3.5% tax, was levied on cloth which was made in Indian industries, so that it will not affect the sale of British cloth in India. As usual, they can sell their British cloth in the markets. If 3.5% tax is levied on cloth made in Indian industries also, it will be again costlier in the market, and all will buy the British cloth. So, with that idea, they levied a similar tax of 3.5% on cloth made in Indian industries also, so that it will not affect the sale of British cloth in India. And this tax levied on Indian cloth in India increased clashes between the Indian and the British government. Between the Indians and the British government, the clashes were increased due to this tax which was levied on Indian cloth in India. And by imposing this tax, the British government made it very clear that it would mainly protect the interests of the British industries, not the Indians. By levying this tax on Indian cloth in India itself, they made it very clear that the British government would mainly protect the interests of the British industries, not the Indian industries. And that is why this tax was strongly opposed by the people who demanded for its removal. And in this way, without any government protection, other industries like jute, paper, cement, etc. were also set up in India, but these industries developed rapidly only after 1914, that is the starting of the First World War. Now, Indian industries during the First World War. Now, let us see what was the condition of Indian industries during the First World War. Why these industries developed during the First World War? Now we are going to discuss about it. But Indian industries were developed during the time of First World War and Second World War. Now what are the reasons for this? During the First World War, that is 1914 to 1918, the war was fought. So during this period, the imports of British goods to India decreased. And the reason for this was all the cargo ships were engaged in war-related duties. And also in European factories, things which were needed for the war and the soldiers were being produced. So goods needed by Indians were not produced, and also the cargo ships were not available to transport the goods. And it was during this time that the industries in India started producing and selling their goods in the market. Because we are not able to import anything from European countries, because they were busy in preparing war materials and also in transporting the war needed goods to the soldiers and other countries. So cargo ships were busy. And also in factories also the goods which were needed by the soldiers and for the war, they were being produced. So they did not produce what was needed by the Indians. So we could not get any imports from European countries, from England. So during this time, some of the industries in India, they started producing and selling their goods in the market in large quantities. And this led to rapid development of industries during this period. And after the end of the World War, European machines were purchased for Indian factories, and because we did not have any machines or machine manufacturing industries also we did not have at that time. So the European machines were purchased for Indian factories and new industries were started in India. And with this, demand of the Indian industrialists to levy tax on foreign goods imported in India also increased. Because they increased their production, they also increased their demand to levy a tax on foreign goods which are imported in India also increased, so that the sale of Indian goods continues in future also. During the World War period, they could sell their goods in large quantities. And to continue the same, they demanded that a tax should be levied on foreign goods which are imported in India. And the government had to accept this demand for various reasons. And after 1917, taxes were levied on foreign goods, and this led to the development of Indian industries. It was thus that the Indian industries started developing. Now we have seen how after a long struggle, Indian industries could get little help from the British government in the form of tax on imports. After a long time, after we struggled for a long period, then Indian industries could get a little help from the British governments in the form of tax on imports, because the government now started imposing tax on imports. Still, many factories, banks, ships, etc., they were under the control of the Europeans. And being Europeans, they could easily approach all types of officers and authorities of the British government. But India did not have such access to higher authorities. European industrialists, they could easily approach all types of officers and authorities of the British government because they are Europeans. They were easily accessible to them. But Indian industrialists, they did not have such access to higher authorities. And also, the Europeans never faced shortage of funds like the Indians. There was shortage of funds for the Indian industrialists, but for European industries, there was never a shortage of funds. And in spite of all these problems, industries like textile, iron and steel industry, they were developed in India. For example, Jamshedji Tata started an iron and steel factory in Jamshedpur. And though the tax levied on foreign goods by the British government in India was helpful to the Indian industrialists, it was not enough, it was not adequate for the development of industries in India. Many other resources like railways, roads, electricity, coal and iron, etc. were also needed. But the British government did not pay any attention to provide these facilities. And moreover, industries which manufacture machinery used in the factories were not started in India yet. So, we had to import such machinery from the European countries. That was the main problem of the Indian industrialists. European industries, they could easily get the machinery because they were manufactured in their own countries, in their own factories. It was easy for them. They had lots of investments with them. And also they had an easy access to the higher authorities and officials to get any of their demands fulfilled. And all these three were not available for the Indian industrialists. They did not have much investments with them. They did not have any access to the higher authorities like the Europeans, industrialists. And also we did not have machinery because till then industries which were manufacturing big machinery to be used in the factories were not started in India. Now for the development of industries in India, even help from scientists, engineers, etc. was needed. At all levels, the help from scientists, engineers, etc. was needed at all levels, but at that time, education was not given importance in India. You may wonder, the literacy rate in India at the time of independence was only 12%. That means out of 100 people, only 12 were literates. Literates means they could read and write only any language. Those are called literates. So 12% was the literacy rate of India at the time of independence, that is in 1951. How can we expect engineers and scientists from this literate population? So the help which we needed, which the industries needed from the engineers and the scientists, it was not available in India. Many organizations of industrialists were formed for promoting the industries in India. And one such important organization was FICCI. FICCI. FICCI full form is Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industries. FICCI full form is Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industries. And the main objective of these organizations which were set up at this time was to bring the problems of the industrialists to the notice of the government so that they could be solved by the government. What was the main objective of these organizations? Like FICCI, to bring the problems of the industrialists to the notice of the government so that they could be solved by the government. And with the end of British rule, the Indian government formulated planned development. As you know, when we became independent, after independence, immediately in 1950, the Planning Commission was set up. And the main objective of this Planning Commission was implementing 5-year plans. And these 5-year plans were implemented from 1951 onwards. For each 5-year plan, for 5 years, one plan. Like that, in the first 5-year plan, which was from 1951 to 56, agriculture was given priority. Because at that time, it was the need of the hour to increase the agricultural production. Because population was more and many of the areas which were producing food grains, they went into Pakistan at the time of partition. So, agriculture was given priority in the first 5-year plan. And second 5-year plan, industries were given priority. Though agriculture was given priority in the first 5-year plan, side by side industries were also given more priority because for developing agriculture, many irrigational projects, multi-purpose projects were constructed on rivers. And these multi-purpose projects, they generated power also. And this power was used by the industries and it helped them in their development. And in second 5-year plan, industries were given priority. And then onwards, in almost all the 5-year plans, agriculture and industries were given importance directly or indirectly. Both this agriculture and industries were given priority. Now, laborers in Indian industries. Industrial cities and labor settlements. From 1850 onwards, machine-based industries have been started to be set up in India. In 1850 onwards, machine-based industries were started to be set up in India, and the biggest industry was the spinning and weaving of textiles. The first and the foremost industry to be started in India was textile industry only, and the biggest such industry was the spinning and weaving of textiles. And in 1905, around 2.25 lakh laborers were in the textile industry, and 1.5 lakh in the jute industry, and about 1 lakh in coal mines. We can see a lot of employment generation was also done in these industries. Needy farmers and laborers and artisans also, they have started coming from the villages to the cities. When these industries were set up in towns and cities, many of the farmers who were in need of money or who were in need of source of livelihood, and many laborers who were in rural villages and artisans, they started coming from the villages to the cities in the hope of employment. That is urbanization. Seeking some sort of employment, they migrated from rural areas to urban towns and cities. And along with them, or after them, after they came and they got some employment opportunities in the cities, in factories, their relatives, their neighbors and their friends also migrated. With their influence, their relatives, neighbors and friends also migrated to towns and cities. And thus the number of laborers in cities increased. One after another, their relatives, neighbors and friends also started coming to cities and settling there in search of employment. And because it was the time of setting up new factories, they could get employment. And all around factories, huts and tenements of laborers sprang up. That means all around the factories, these people started settling there itself. By making a small hut or by tenement, they settled there itself. And many cities of India like Kanpur, Mumbai, Ahmedabad, Kolkata, Chennai, they became large industrial cities. Because many of the rural people, they came to towns and cities and settled there to work in these factories. The urbanizations increased and also the number of laborers and artisans also increased coming to the towns and cities. Now, We'll stop it here and I'll continue it in the next video.